I'm Casey Patterson.
I'm Felicia Jones.
And this is Thriving While Black,
the podcast.
Our guest today is the executive director of the Black Freedom Fund, Marc Philpart. He's the former managing director at PolicyLink and an HBCU grad. So we are going to be talking to Marc today about leading while Black and all the work that he's done to bring the Black Freedom Fund to bear in California, and how he's working with an entire network of funders and Black-led organizations to really change the landscape of power building in California. But first, let's talk a little bit about how we know him.
Yeah.
So tell us, how did you first meet Marc?
I had to think about that. I feel like I've known him probably longer than I actually have because he's made that much of an impact in the spaces that I've been in. But I certainly know it was through the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. I'm sure he was leading a statewide effort, and I was thinking, where did this guy come from? I hadn't seen him before, but he was really powerful and smart and bright, and just bringing just all this game to the organizing space. And so I was impressed from the moment I met him, and we found each other in different spaces along the way. That's why I feel like we've had a long journey together, but I don't think it's been that long, but we've found ways to be in community and collaboration with each other. And so that's kind of how I got to know him.
Yeah. Well, I actually didn't meet Marc until the Black Freedom Fund, until he got hired for the Black Freedom Fund. I had heard his name. It's sort of this thing, I feel like, in our work where everyone's in this big pool, but you have different lanes,
Yeah.
And so I feel like we were always in the same pool, but in different lanes. And so when he started working for the Black Freedom Fund and he was hired, the Freedom Fund had already launched, and so he became the inaugural executive director. And, I was very involved in helping to launch the Freedom Fund. And so having him join, it was sort of a blank canvas because I had never met him before. I hadn't worked with him before. And so, I had to be like, okay, now who is this dude?
Right.
It seemed like he a good dude, but we have to figure this out, But all of the good rumors are true. He's a great guy. I think very mission-minded when it comes to Black power building. I think the work that he did at PolicyLink really sort of set him up to run the Black Freedom Fund well and sort of be a different kind of funder, because I think it's easy in philanthropy to claim a position of power now that you're sort of in this perch. But what I have found in Marc is that he is always community first, that he always wants to be community led and community driven, and really seed the platform, to folks in community, so that the kind of power that's being built is the power that really comes from bottom up. So
Absolutely.
I have found him to be not just an incredible colleague to work with, but really a trusted confidant. We have a lot of conversations about the work between the Freedom Fund, the Black Equity Collective, sort of philanthropy in general, and I find him to be a good guy, one of the ones who's really doing the work for the right reasons.
He is a trusted partner. He definitely cares about community. He would not do anything without community. So I love Marc.
Yes.
So I'm excited.
And I'll just say on a personal level, I'm the only woman who sort of is part of the founding group of community leaders who helped to start the fund. And, as a Black woman, there's a history of our contributions being erased. And so I'll be the first to say that I had a little trepidation not knowing him, when he came into the role. I had a little trepidation about what is that going to look like? I'm not trying to have an ego here about it, but I'm also not trying to be erased. And so how does that actually work? And I have to say that Marc has been very vocal about making sure that as a Black woman, my contributions to the fund have never been erased. He's always, in fact, we were at an event together last week, and he talked about the role that I had with Anthony Thigpen and Reverend Ben McBride in helping to start the fund. So he's always very good about making sure that he sort of stands on our shoulders and names the contributions of community. So I appreciate that about him. Okay, so we're excited for the conversation today. So please welcome to the show the Executive Director of the Black Freedom Fund, Marc Philpart.
Welcome.
Well, thank you.
Hi, Marc.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for being here today. It's good to see you, brother.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming to talk about the Freedom Fund.
Yes.
And coming all the way from Oakland to come down back to LA to have this conversation.
This is my second home. Well,
it's your second home now.
It's my first home, but now that I live in the Bay Area, it is second home.
Now you're second home.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. So you're an LA guy. Tell us about your childhood. Like, what was it like for you growing up in LA? And, what did you experience that really speaks to your work today and who you are today?
I like to reflect on my formative years here as really creating a foundation for who I am and why I do the work that I do. I grew up in South Central, Crenshaw and Jefferson. That neighborhood is very different from how it looked when I was growing up,
right.
But there are still some similar landmarks. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and LA was just a totally different animal then. I think it's improved significantly in terms of just safety. Because at the time, for me, that was the number one thing that I remember. And, the level of community violence, the substance abuse issues, the lack of economic opportunity, unemployment, all those things were really concentrated in our community. And for me, it came to a place where I actually started to recognize those things more prominently during the LA uprising in '92. That was really that was my awakening. That was the moment for me where it was like, oh wow, something's happening. There is this rampant inequity and this police abuse of power.
How old were you when that happened?
I was 12.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, I was 12 years old when the city was burning. My neighborhood was on fire. People were in the streets. I had the National Guard literally walking down my street with machine guns telling us to get inside.
What kind of impressions did that leave in your 12-year-old mind?
Well, I started to ask questions. Why are we always victimized by the police? Why don't we own any of the assets in our community? Why is our neighborhood on fire versus the neighborhoods that were just a couple miles away and more affluent communities? And so it really set me on a path of questioning. I don't think I came out of that period as a 12-year-old with any answers, but it definitely put me on a path to where I was more intentional about trying to find answers and more committed to social questions and social justice. And so that really was the bedrock for me to be in this position now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And were you involved like in high school stuff that just, that sort of piqued your interest in social justice?
No,
no?
I mean, it really wasn't as intentional at that stage as I would have liked it to be. To be quite honest with you, I had a hard time thinking that I would live past 18.
Really?
I wasn't involved in any nefarious activity. I wasn't in in any gangs or anything like that. It was just this overwhelming sense that at any moment you could lose your life. And, you know, I had that, I was holding that from elementary school on. I mean, the first time that I knew of someone being killed in my community was in elementary school, because he was one of my peers at the time, because they said he was a transformer. He was, one day he was a Crip, the next day he was a Blood, and that was it. And, you know, I can very vividly remember walking to and from school, picking up bullet shell casings. I had a little box of bullet shell casings. I could tell the difference between a cop gun and a cop bullet versus a, you know, and I'm just a regular kid, not, you know, I didn't have any older influences who were bringing me into the life or anything like that. But I just had, you know, this understanding of the violence in the neighborhood and in the community, the level of like insecurity that caused brought me to a place where it was hard to imagine what could actually be for me as an individual. So all the way up until high school, you know, I did the things to apply for college, and because my mom said I had to do that, but I was just like, college, you know, like I had, you know, I was playing basketball. I was enjoying just the general atmosphere of being a high school kid, but it was really hard to dream until I got to be 18, and I was like, oh, I got to do something with myself.
So you're an HBCU graduate, and you spent your early career in public health. In California, you know, you're best known for your work with PolicyLink and the Alliance for Boys and Men of Color. So, you know, from college to now running the Black Freedom Fund, what, you know, talk about that journey, because at some point you clearly saw yourself living beyond 18.
Right.
So what was that journey?
You know, happenstance in a lot of ways. A buddy of mine in high school took a trip to Xavier, and I went with him because he was going down there to visit family and to see the campus. And I was like, he invited me, so I said, sure, why not? And so I went, and I loved it. I was like, this is incredible. And so that year, senior year, or the year you apply, it might have been our junior year, I actually applied, and he applied. We both got in, but my mom's job relocated her. So she had to move when we were planning to graduate from high school. She had to move from LA to the Bay.
Oh.
And so, you know, she, at the time, we didn't have the resources to complete a move and send me to school. So I went with her after I graduated to the Bay Area, went to a community college there for a year. And my mom desperately wanted me to go to a local Cal State or some other. She wanted me to stay close. But I still had my eyes set on going back to Xavier. So I went to Xavier. And it was just transformative to be in a community where there were Black people of all stripes and walks of life who, you know, were leading things, building things, taking their creativity and their leadership to incredible levels, and just such an inspirational community to be a part of, that really got me to think about how far I could go, and what I should be contributing to the world. And there was just a mindset shift that I think occurred as part of me being in that dynamic campus environment and having to grow up there. And so from there, I went to grad school and studied public health and public affairs at the University of Washington in Seattle. So I go from a HBCU to a predominantly white institution in Seattle.
Wow.
Go from a majority Black city in New Orleans to a predominantly white city in Seattle. And, you know, just had to make my way and really deal with all the stuff that comes along with that. Worked at a global health organization for a couple of years, but then transitioned to PolicyLink in 2009. Had the opportunity to work with one of my late great mentors who just passed, Joe Brooks, and just an incredible experience, and never look back. So,
how do you think Policy Link prepared you for the Freedom Fund?
Yeah.
you know, Policy Link is such an incredible training ground for leaders who are interested in social justice work, may not necessarily, understand the right entry point for them, but there are so many people who have cut their teeth there, who are either in philanthropy or other organizations or just in movement spaces. I felt like it put me in a position to, one, think strategically about how to build something, because at the time, the work that I ended up leading hadn't been created. It was just an initiative that they were having conversation about, but we had to build it into a real thing.
And this was right at the precipice of President Obama's first election, correct?
So this was, 2008, 2009, right before, he had really cemented his social and domestic agenda. And, there were people knew that there was interest, that the Obama administration had interest in boys and men of color work, but they didn't really know just to what length he would go. So while we were building this ecosystem and really trying to create a network that had impact, that had connection to place, but that was also driving policy, we had so many strategic questions to wrestle with. We then got to a place where that work evolved because other funders across the country were interested in joining. And so we were able to participate in that. And then it grew even further when President Obama, in his second term, finally said, I want to create an initiative, following Trayvon Martin's murder, that ended up being My Brother's Keeper. And so I got a chance to see and be a part of all those different levels of work and activity and
those
leadership.
Iterations of strategy and development.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just, the kinds of considerations that people weigh at different levels and at different institutions, is really, really interesting. So that was the training ground for me at Policy. Like, I got a chance to have a front row seat into all those different conversations and spaces. And you just, and learn from people who had been in the game for 30, 40 years. And so it was one of those things where I was just, on the edge of my seat every time, you get a chance to sit with Angela Glover Blackwell or Joe Brooks. These are people who have such a tremendous track record, so impressive in their thought leadership. And I soaked up every moment I could.
So from Policy Link, Boys and Men of Color, to the Black Freedom Fund.
Yes.
Man.
What a leap.
What a leap. What a leap.
I always say there's this a bit of culture shock, I feel like, that happens when people come from community-based organizations, even policy advocacy organizations, right? That they're not quite grassroots, but they're more grassroots than philanthropy usually. And there's a bit of culture shock that happens. So tell us about what is the value proposition of the Black Freedom Fund, and how have you seen that value proposition either change or be reinforced since you took over as executive director?
Yeah, this is a great question. And for me, I think the value proposition is that, and it is different for different audiences and different people who have interests in the Freedom Fund. But first and foremost, we're building a Black power building ecosystem. Right. We're creating the investment and the support that leaders, organizations, coalitions, and networks need in order to build power in the Black community in the state of California.
And it was started really in the summer of George Floyd.
Right.
So tell us a little about that origin.
born out of, great pain, misery, and loss.
Yeah.
The Freedom Fund was really seeking to transform the relationship that philanthropy had with the Black community. Because what we know to be true, and as Los Angelinos, you know this really well, when there's a crisis in the Black community, there is a wave of support from philanthropy.
Right.
We saw this in 1965 with the Watts Rebellion. We saw it in 1992 with the LA Uprising. But as soon as the cameras turn away, the support recedes.
Right.
And in order for us to have the power that we need to have self-determination, to have repair, and to have, the thriving communities that we deserve, we need to have strong institutions that have sustained investment.
That's right.
And you can't have this kind of yo-yoing and seesawing of funding and expect for organizations to be able to carry the interests of their community in real sustainable ways. And so the value proposition for the Freedom Fund is that we are here to build that kind of lasting power for the Black community. And that's what we have committed ourselves to for the long haul.
So that speaks a little bit to my next question, and I wonder if you could talk more specifically about the unique role of the Freedom Fund in really building this ecosystem of Black power building organizations, because this is what I always like to say, like, let's be real, right? The Freedom Fund is relatively new. Yes. And I think that there's always this misconception. I see this sometimes in philanthropy. Like, there's this misconception that the work began when the thing was stood up, and that's not true. Like, the work of Black power building, Black ecosystem building long predated the Freedom Fund. It predated the Black Equity Collective. And so, our organization sort of now become unique vehicles in an ecosystem that was already there, maybe somewhat disconnected, but already there and building. But there's a unique role, for our organizations to play in helping to continue to contribute to building and strengthening that ecosystem. Right. So I wonder if you could talk about, what do you see as the Freedom Fund's unique role?
Yeah, it's a great question. The Freedom Fund's unique role in sustaining this ecosystem is that it is a philanthropic institution that can, if properly stewarded, have the corpus that can maintain the investment long-term in this ecosystem. In addition, I think there is an element of awareness and organizing of the philanthropic sector that is critically important to ensure that institutional funders and donors and family foundations are aware of this powerful ecosystem. There is often this common refrain of, like, we don't know who to go to, or we don't know what organizations are doing what in this community. And you can't say that now. We have a formal place that is a fixture in the philanthropic world, and if you have a question, you can get it answered. And by virtue of having the ear of some of these entities as a peer, I think it is meaningful to, have a way to engage them that talks more about what their institutions can do beyond their grant making as well. Because, and I think you all know this, we all know this, that there are ways that funders can lead and partner that aren't always about an investment. I mean, an investment is critical. An investment is critical.
Yeah, let's say that. Like,
yes,
don't not invest.
Don't not invest. I don't want people to get the wrong message here.
That's right.
Invest.
But don't
just invest, because partnership is so much more than that.
Right,
and those of us who are in movement work, are risking everything. In many instances, we're asked to risk everything, and oftentimes you need institutions to join in support in ways that extend beyond the we cut a check and that's it.
Give us some examples of that. What does it mean to actually lead in this space when you are leading beyond the check?
I think leading beyond the check also, it means in my mind that people, I think the Freedom Fund is a perfect example of the type of leadership that philanthropy more broadly should demonstrate when it comes to partnership with the Black community. Mm-hmm. So our investment and our commitment is really, multi-year, multi-million-dollar investment in networks like Black Equity Collective, the Black Power Network, Live Free California. We are not saying we're just making a 2-year grant or there's a limited grant cycle, and after that, we don't know what'll happen. We're saying, no, we're with you for this period, and we have a number that we're trying to get to in terms of our investment, and that number is transformative. So it's audacious investment goals, long-term, bold investments that aren't taking people outside of their mission. So people can continue to do the work that they're doing and then use it as part of their core support. And in addition to that, there's the leadership, right? We are our partners, in the truest sense of the word. So, we're organizing a lobby day or a community day of action in Sacramento. We're advocating for the legislature to invest in our communities, and we're doing that work together. We're organizing philanthropy, networks are bringing their strength and their heft to the table, and we're in partnership, It also means sign-on letters and expressing support and putting your institution's name on a dotted line in terms of visibility, credibility. It means being partners on events and things of that nature.
And I think providing other sorts of capacities to the field, like communications capacity.
Exactly.
Just even the work that you're doing around sort of legal aid and helping the ecosystem to be strong and sort of have the kind of supports that one individual organization alone probably can't afford.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's my next point is programmatically, we're really leaning into all of the assets that we have in our community to be able to leverage them in a way that's going to provide us with legal education and support. We know that this is a very litigious period, especially for Black organizations, and because of the attacks that are taking shape, which are fascist in nature. I just want to call it what it is.
Say that.
We are determined to protect our organizations and make sure they have the information that they need to manage risk. And so while foundations are doing all this work to, make sure that they're apprised of these issues, we're rolling out programming this summer that's going to ensure that our community partners have access to the same insight.
That's good.
And then have tools and have access to lawyers for consultation so that they can determine how to move and drive their work as well. So we're defending our community and the important investments that we've made, and we're not turning away from folks. We recognize that this is important work. It's work that should have happened a long time ago. For a lot of folks, it just started happening in 2020. So we're inviting them to come along with us. But it's important for us to continue racial justice philanthropy. And if we let those who are seeking the total destruction of our country win, then what are we doing this for? So,
well, and I think that what you're discussing is a really important point around the role of institutions and the role of having institutions that are positioned to really support and defend the interest of communities. And in your case, obviously, it's the Black community. In the case of the Black Equity Collective, which I'm also the founder and chief architect of, it's a similar proposition, right? Like we are here to help build the long-term sustainability of Black-led and empowering organizations. The Black Equity Collective is one of the Freedom Fund's network partners. Okay, so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how do you see the collective really contributing to this broader ecosystem? We talked earlier about, in our introduction, we talked about how, we're in the same pool, but not always in the same lane. Everyone has their lane, everyone has their role to play. And so you are sort of playing, I would say, like at a 100,000 foot level, we may be playing at like a 30,000 foot level, So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how do you see the Black Equity Collective being part of this broader ecosystem?
Yeah, the Black Equity Collective plays a critical role in my mind. We, don't have, within the ecosystem of power building organizations and networks, we don't have, I'd say we do have in the Black Equity Collective, but I think that this is the missing piece, real strong infrastructure around organizational health and resilience, and really thinking about the well-being of the organization as an entity and how you need that entity to be strong in order to build the power that you need in the community.
That's right.
And so to have the collective be positioned in tackling some of those issues and questions, that really is a great contribution to the kind of tapestry of network infrastructure, and something that none of the other networks are really equipped to do. And so I really see that as a unique contribution and an asset that we need to scale. I love the idea of y'all thinking about going beyond the region that you're currently in, and thinking about all the ways in which you can expand your impact and do the work at a greater scale. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of the collective, and
thank you.
Love the work that y'all are continuing to grow.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
wonderful. I know the folks at Policy Link are super proud of you, and and just your own leadership journey. But just thinking about leadership development, how should we be thinking about that for the future that we're trying to create, and thinking about your own evolution from policy. Well, from LA to Policy Link to now in this role. Like, what have you learned that you would tell your past self about this journey?
We need to be more organized when it comes to leadership development.
Okay, say more.
I feel like we are, in many instances, not thinking big enough about the gaps and the opportunities. So often we're creating these kind of like atomized or balkanized spaces for cultivating leadership, where it's like, this is my community that I serve, so I'm building leadership pathways for them. Or this is, this is my set of member entities, and I'm building leadership for them. And yet we lack a public space for people to access leadership opportunities.
If they're not connected into that.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we are limited to a universe that is not going to move as quickly as the pace of the movement requires, or have the scale that the movement requires. And then the tools that we use are often outdated. We will likely have to require people to be in person, or to go through a curriculum that is 8 weeks long, and that requires, and instead of thinking about 21st century learning and adult learning and all the things that go into that, and how we might be able to use more sophisticated technology tools so that we can get to greater scale. So there are, I think, many, many challenges when it comes to leadership development. But I think one of the biggest ones that I see is that we're so hunkered down and focused on our own space that sometimes it's hard to get into thinking about how we solve these challenges from a movement perspective, not just from the perspective of the perch you may have. And so I think that is something that keeps me up at night, in part because, I see, the networks, the organizations we serve, like everybody is doing some version of a leadership effort, but they're not rolling up to the level of scale that we need in order to win on things that are really pressing for our community.
This is really interesting because I think we've talked about that before, about how as a movement, we don't often think about how we, play our best players in the right space and build our players for the right space. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing. Like, how should we as a movement be thinking about how to groom a leader so that they're not just singularly tied to one organization, but we're also giving them a vision and creating a pathway for them.
Right.
Is that?
Right. That's right. And when we think about philanthropy, when we think about policy, when we think about all the places where power is wielded, the pathways are so few and far between. So very limited. And in certain instances, the infrastructure just doesn't exist for people to get into anything. So,
well, I was just going to say, how would you solve for that?
Exactly.
Like not enough time?
Not enough time.
Yeah.
I feel like we, and if I had the answer, I'd probably be in a different role. Right?
Okay.
But I think that's the reason why, like, being in networks with other folks is important, because these are questions that kind of get dropped in the room, right? And then there's an opportunity to kind of co-create and ideate together around, like, how do we solve this? What will we do about this? This is the challenge of our day, kind of thing.
It absolutely is. And, I have lots of conversations with people about programming to, address one end of it or another. But the scale is always so small, in part because the capital doesn't exist to be able to.
I mean, will it exist?
Right.
But
well,
it's
not.
Yeah.
It's
it doesn't flow.
It's misallocated right now.
It doesn't flow. Okay, well let's
my
stay.
savings and my checking work.
Exactly.
But
let's stay in this space of ideating, okay, and sort of dreaming about what could be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When you think about the idea of thriving while Black, and you close your eyes, what images or possibilities come to mind for you?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is joy. Is that there's this boundless joy, that people are living in abundant joy. There is no limit to happiness, and there is no consternation around lack of this or that, but people have what they need, and there is a certain calmness and peace and happiness that just generally is bubbling over, right, in all of our communities and our households. So to me, that is the thing that comes to mind, and it actually leads to one of the things that I've, did a workshop many, many years ago with Sean Jenwright, who is another person who should be on Thrive on My Life.
Yeah, that's right. He's a pioneer.
Acclaimed author, Sean Jenwright.
Of course.
And he asked me to think about a motto. What's my motto? And for me, it was joy and justice.
I
want to
that.
bring joy and justice into the world. And so when I think about thriving while Black, I think about joy, and it just made me think about joy and justice.
Joy and justice. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Well, while you're thinking about that, you've clearly already made some significant contributions to the Black community and helping the Black community thrive. But if you could say how you are paving a new way for Black folks to thrive, what would you say you are doing to pave a new way?
Well, I think first and foremost, it starts with the day-to-day of the job. I feel like the Freedom Fund is, in my mind, giving people a new way to look at the possibility of what philanthropy could be. It's not a stilted, stodgy, bureaucratic effort. This is a startup. This is an entity that is being created from whole cloth with the help of leaders like y'all and others who, have really poured into it, Casey. This is something that is reflective of all of us and our aspirations. And I think that is different from the norm, because oftentimes
that's not how most foundations are started. Yeah.
They ask you to fill out a survey, but who knows what happens with that input you give them,
This is true.
And in real time, we heard from our leaders in one of our surveys that, following the pandemic, that people were beat down and worn out and just tired and overwhelmed by virtue of the experience with the pandemic and all the organizing that took place, and asked for healing. And so, and we had an opportunity to create a sabbatical program. We jumped at it. We could have said, hey, no, this is not a good year because we're spinning off. It's a startup, yada, yada, yada. But to me, it was important to look back at that feedback, be responsive, think about the opportunity that was being put in front of us, and to, find a way to bridge the gap.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing with the Freedom Fund. And I think that gives people a new way to look at philanthropy. It's pushing the margins of what the sector can be and do.
Yes.
And I'm excited about that.
I love that. I love that.
Appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Marc. It has been such a joy, to have you on the show today and to talk about the Black Freedom Fund. And I think the way in which we reimagine what philanthropy is and can be is one important tool that we have and that we need to use when we think about how do we create the conditions for Black folks to thrive in California and for California to be a place where Black folks can thrive. The Freedom Fund is really, I think, put a stake in the ground around that. And so we just appreciate the hard work, the hard labor that you're doing to bring folks to the table and pioneer and create new ways.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you too.
Well, we can't let you go yet without doing something for the culture.
That's right.
Okay.
We do this thing called rapid fire this or that.
Okay.
So we got a couple of this or that questions for you, and some that take,
off the top of the dome. You ain't got to think too deep.
Of the dome. So, LA or Bay Area?
Y'all trying to get me hurt. Y'all trying to get me hurt. I already messed up on the beginning of the podcast saying LA is a second home. I'm like, actually, no, let me backtrack. So you got me dancing here. I'm a pass. Can I pass?
I guess you can pass. We're going to let you pass.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay, the career.
That was a hot one.
Yeah, that was a hot one. We're
Like,
sorry about that one. So, we didn't ask you Warriors or Lakers, so that was what we definitely didn't want to do. So it's okay.
Yes.
Okay, the career you imagined for yourself as a child.
It was, so my mom for a long time had an optometrist that she went to in Santa Monica. Mm-hmm. And I was like, dang, it's nice over here. I was like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
Maybe I should be an optometrist. I had no idea. I was just like, this guy had these nice glasses, and this beach is beautiful.
Oh,
and
my goodness.
All of these stores and shops. I could get comic books out there. I couldn't get comic books in the hood. I had a comic book fetish. I was loving that.
Yeah. Oh, my
gosh. To me, that was the childhood dream.
Really?
And I didn't shake it until I went to Xavier.
Oh, wow.
And I started to
interesting.
study. I was biology pre-med while I was at
really?
Xavier.
Oh, wow.
There was a part of my story I didn't tell y'all. So my
Yeah.
mom, from like 8th grade to when I left high school,
Yeah.
I was in a Saturday program called USC MedCorps.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And every
Uh-huh.
Saturday is led by Dr. John Davis. I believe Dr. John Davis was the founder of USC MedCorps. Every Saturday, kids from all over inner city LA would go to USC for math and science enrichment.
Yeah.
And I did that pretty much from middle school to high school because my mom didn't want me just hanging out.
Just hanging out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was in
So
this
you were
program.
on the optometry track
I was
for
on
a
the
while.
and so I was
Wow.
like, I guess this is what I want to do. When I got to college, I was just like, a cell is a cell is a cell. I'm not excited about it, and I was more excited about social justice, political science, sociology, law and humanities. So I changed my major.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we're
Optometry.
glad you did.
I'm glad, yeah, we are the beneficiaries
Yes.
of that. Okay, so favorite dad moments.
Oh, favorite dad moments. I have 3 kids, so
Oh, are we making you choose?
This is hard. This is hard.
Yeah.
So I would
Yeah.
say we did home births.
Oh, you did home
yeah.
birth.
We did home births.
Beautiful.
Oh, that
So-
is beautiful.
All of them I caught.
Oh, what a moment.
Oh, that's a beautiful
Yeah, those
moment.
are beautiful
Yeah.
moments.
Oh, my
Oh, I
goodness.
love that.
Oh,
Thank
I
you for
love
sharing
that.
that.
So you're in a fraternity.
Yes, Alpha
tell
Phi
us,
Alpha
yes,
Fraternity
Alpha Phi,
Incorporated.
yes, and tell us the best thing about being an alpha.
Well, the best thing about being an alpha, I would say, is the commitment to social justice. There are so many alpha brothers in movement work. I'm greatly appreciative to have that community. I would say more than any other fraternity, any other Black fraternity, we probably got the social justice movement space on lock in comparison.
All right.
Yeah,
That's nice to
I'm
know
proud to
about
claim
alpha.
that.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's right.
that's what's up.
Yeah.
Okay, these are the final questions, but they're rapid fire. Adventurous vacation or relaxing vacation?
Relaxing.
Yes.
You
I
live
feel
enough
like
adventure in
I
your
have enough adventure. I have enough adventure. A relaxing vacation where I don't have to do anything is the preference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Tupac or Too Short?
Oh, Tupac. All day.
Tupac.
All day. All day. And,
So that's how you claim LA a little bit.
I claim LA, but Tupac
So I
has
was
Bay
like-
Area roots.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
that's
I
what
was
we
going to say.
talked
I said
about.
I don't claim
Yeah.
Tupac as LA, but maybe.
Yeah, no. He claims both. He claims
Okay.
both. I think early Tupac is Bay Area.
Yeah. Yes, of
that's what we
course.
talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then-
Digital
Yeah.
Underground.
Digital
Yeah.
Underground.
The post jail Tupac is
LA.
It's
Yeah,
different.
yeah,
Wow.
it's,
Okay.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
So you can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's you.
We ain't gotta be
Yes.
at each other
No,
north
you
and
don't
south.
have to be,
We gonna
yeah.
unify the Bay and LA.
Come on, make it
on
happen.
Thriving While Black.
That's right.
Clearly it's
We're making it happen today. Marc Philpart, Executive Director of the Black Freedom Fund. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really
Yes.
enjoyed having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.